It's day 800. It's also July 14th, 2021. And we are in Saratoga Springs, in Utah. You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life. Life out there. For visuals while listening, to watch the video versions of this podcast, or even just to say hey, check us out on our website at lifeoutthere.me. Moving again. Feels good. Feels familiar. That sense of wonder, exhilaration even, that comes over me when the road opens up in front of us. And few signs of civilization, if you strip out the power lines ticking by and those reflective center lines rolling up underneath and then out behind. Any other traces of civilization are rare. And that is when it's the best. Now, if you're headed west out of Rangeley, you don't have many options if you're relegated to asphalt, and kind of a bummer we are. That also explains why we'd become so familiar with Dinosaur Colorado and Vernal Utah. This would mark our 5th pass through the area in just the last couple years, and including that familiar stop at the Walmart to gas up, stock up on supplies. But this time, Vernal is where the familiarity would end. We'd gone north from here, we'd continued west from here, so this time, south. Well, southwest sorta, and into a landscape that we hadn't seen before. Over the next couple hundred miles, scenery would shift. We'd put those rugged, wide-open mountains of Colorado's high desert and oil fields in the rearview, and back into Utah's Uinta Mountains. Initially, things felt sort of the same. But then, a shift. We'd begun a slow climb into Provo Canyon, and around nearly every bend, Mother Nature just continued shape-shifting. The peaks of the mountains got sharper, higher. And before we knew it, the browns and reds of the Uinta Basin had transformed into sudden bursts of green. As the road began to narrow, squeezed in between mountains that felt straight out of the Pacific Northwest, the air cools just enough to notice. Trees start showing up where they weren't invited before. Cottonwoods at first, then evergreens. The kind of green you don't see in desert places. As if the land was coming back to life. And suddenly, there was water everywhere. The Provo River runs alongside the road, cutting its way down out of the Wasatch Mountains. Seems like you can almost hear it before you really see it, rushing, tumbling, a constant reminder that this place, this area, has been shaped by flow, not force. Snowmelt turned into movement. And then, as if Mother Nature just needed to put a big old exclamation point on everything, we'd come upon Bridal Veil Falls. Water spilling straight off limestone cliffs fed by the Provo River system, breaking into a mist before it ever reaches the canyon floor. It's not subtle, doesn't hide. It just announces itself. After hundreds of miles of dry ground and muted color, that burst of white water and deep green almost felt unreal. As if the landscape just decided to show off. And that canyon, well, kind of felt like a threshold. On one side, the wide, hard-worked basin. On the other, a world shaped by water and elevation. And as you come out of the canyon and into Utah Valley, the river widens, it slows, and eventually feeds into Utah Lake. The same water that came screaming down the canyon spreads out and settles. Utah Lake itself is broad and shallow, fed by the Provo River along with the Spanish Fork and American Fork rivers. And in July, it sits heavy and reflective under the sun, surrounded by farmland, development, and that constant Wasatch backdrop. The contrast is striking. Had to pull off for a closer look and some lunch. We'd pulled off into a state park along Utah Lake. It looked like tons of RV parking available. We had a quick lunch in the parking lot. I was actually contemplating a night or two alongside the lake, but then I popped open one of those gig apps on my phone. I was surprised to learn that another one of those Walmart remodels were underway, just a few miles up the road, in a place called Saratoga Springs. Cool, I thought. Just like that one we'd worked a few months back in Spirit Lake, Iowa. All the folks I had met there, from all over the country, the stuff I'd learned about how a store, in sections, gets taken apart, rearranged, and then put back together every night so the store can reopen for business again the next day. So, it was off to Saratoga Springs. I'd already accepted a few days' worth of overnight work before we even rolled into town. We'd park on the Walmart parking lot. And that 100-degree afternoon was demanding some air conditioning, so the generator was fired up, and I started to look for the nearest RV park, put a plan in place for the next few days. And this is when I'd learned the first of many things about Saratoga Springs. There are no RV parks. A town of 30,000 people had 0 RV parks? Weird. I continued to dig. It seemed our best options were a couple of state parks out there around the lake like the one we had just left. Maybe some boondocking opportunity as well. But neither of those were great options given how far away they were and we'd be commuting back and forth each day. So, immediate plan? Just stay here for now. Walmart allows overnight parking. And that was evident, given that there were already a handful of other RVs parked around us. Billy and I were pretty stocked up on groceries. Temps were cooling to comfortable in the early evening, so I headed out for my first look around Saratoga Springs on the electric bike. The first thing I noticed was that everything looked pretty new. Many of the shopping centers were either still under construction or just wrapping up construction, and loads of wide-open fields that had been cleared and prepped for what looked like subdivisions maybe, office spaces, maybe more shopping. I headed back to the Walmart for a check-in with Billy, a little reading about this place, maybe a quick nap before my first shift. And initially, a read about this area sounds very familiar to us. An area that during the Ice Age, from like 30,000 to as recently as 13,000 years ago, this whole basin was filled by a giant freshwater lake. It was called Lake Bonneville. At its peak, Lake Bonneville was massive, about 325 miles long, over 1,000 feet deep, extending over much of western Utah. Even parts of Nevada, it looked like. As the climate warmed, Bonneville would begin to recede. And thousands of years later, Utah Lake and the Saratoga Springs are all that remain of that once massive lake. Now, the time frames in which humans would find their way into the area, that's pretty familiar as well. Here, it was some 11,000 years ago or so. Paleo-Indian groups would arrive through the river valleys and settle around the lake shores. Abundant fishing and hunting, combined with their ability to adapt to the harsh weather the area had become prone to, well, that would lead them to prosper. And as time passes, various Native American cultures would weave in and out of the area's inhabitants. I read again of the Fremont, the Timpanogos, and the Ute people. Europeans wouldn't arrive until the 1700s and into the early 1800s. It was a very different scene out here than that of the east coast of the continent, in which battles and revolutions were well underway as a young America was fighting to establish itself. But out here, settlement by Europeans hadn't gone much beyond farming, fur trading. There was even a resort, Beck's Saratoga Springs. The area had become known for its resort opportunity, those Saratoga Springs. And along with the introduction of railway through the area, it began providing easier access. No real establishment or incorporation of a town yet, but all easily accessible to the more heavily populated areas of Salt Lake City and Provo. I was imagining hundreds finding their way to this summertime oasis, but not in cars or campers, in trains, horse-drawn wagons, and carriages. And it was then, in my reading, when suddenly what I was looking at today all made sense, why it all felt so new. Well, that's because it is very new. Communities did indeed grow and expand around the lake and the resort, but there would be no real development until the late 1900s. As the mining economies boomed in nearby urban areas and the resort economy was dying off here, it wouldn't be until 1997 that Saratoga Springs would incorporate and become a city. Cost of living in those larger cities, well, that had put a new light on this area. It was now seen as a place where folks could afford things that might have been just out of reach, just 20 or so miles away, in places like Salt Lake City, Provo, and Orem. And from that moment, growth was explosive. Folks looking for more affordable homes, stunning views of the Utah Lake, quick access to those nearby urban job centers, and a place to raise families, would pour into the area. And by 2021, what was once open land and resort memories had turned into tens of thousands of residents. A suburban city with parks, schools, a feel of its own. Most of it still booming. Even a Walmart just 15 years old was undergoing a remodel. The one that brought us here. I'd worked 3 overnights at the Walmart. Things worked out pretty well. We just stayed for the most part on Walmart's parking lot with electric bike rides around the area from time to time. The shifts were overnight, so the RV was plenty cool for Billy and in plain sight, making it easy for frequent check-ins. Most of the time, Billy just sleeping, not wanting to be bothered. But on our 3rd day, we'd driven out to the lake, spent the day along its shores in a dispersed campsite. We'd headed back into town, back onto the Walmart parking lot, but it was still hot. It was still around 100 degrees, so I fired up the generator in the AC so Billy and I could have a bit of a nap before I headed out for another overnight. As I napped on and off, hum of the generator outside and the AC inside, I contemplated how much longer we wanted to stay here before continuing west. There was weeks worth of work available here, but I knew I didn't want to stay that long. But then again, every shift meant another $100 or so of gas and food money. And any day you can stay out of savings, well, that's a good day. But then, a knock on the door. And I had no idea as I answered the door to a Walmart assistant manager that the decision was about to be made for us. He politely explained that this Walmart was shifting its policy and would no longer be allowing overnight parking. Of course, no argument here, rules are rules. But I did ask, after explaining that we were actually here working on their remodel, if he knew of any RV parking options in town. Even he looked puzzled. He actually commented, "You know, I live here. I should probably know that." And it was clear that he understood the strange predicament here, in which somebody actually working at the store would not be allowed to park on the store's parking lot. We laughed, agreeing that he probably couldn't think of an RV park around here because there wasn't one. But he did generously and creatively try to offer up solutions. Maybe just park over there, he said, behind the store with the employees during the night remodel work, and then head back out to one of the state parks during the day. I thanked him, but explained that he'd sort of helped me make a decision. Tonight, that'd be my last shift here, and we'd head out in the morning. And that was that. Our time in Saratoga Springs would end tomorrow morning. And as soon as my shift ended the following morning, we headed over to a dump station I'd located to empty the tanks and fill the freshwater tank, stock up on a few groceries, and head north to Salt Lake City. That had been the plan all along anyway. We'd passed it on the freeway a couple of times in our travels, but never really stopped to look around. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. Sunny, not a cloud in the sky. Temperatures still comfortable in the 70s. We were cruising along the freeway with the windows cracked, and it felt pretty awesome. But I had no idea how everything was about to change. This thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously. You can.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.